The movie begins by stating that it is based on a true incident. The scene shifts to a blogger who visits a haunted house. He explains that this house is far from the village, and the villagers are too scared to go near it. The blogger shares stories his grandfather told him about a fakir named Lasavandi, who once lived there. Villagers claim to hear strange voices from the house, saying, "He will come after the dark shadow." Some believe the spirit of Las roams the house, and screams are often heard through the cracks in the walls. The story also mentions an elderly woman, over 100 years old, thought to be crazy. She was a shepherd who grazed sheep and scared the children with her sudden screams and cries at night. She used to go in and out of the haunted house, and years ago, her naked body was found on the roof. Her sheep also died mysteriously, and no one knows why. We are then introduced to a little girl named Alan, whose life was filled with pain. Her mother remarried, and her stepfather sexually abused her. When Alan told her mother, she was told to endure it. One night, after being molested again, Alan killed her parents by slitting their throats as they slept. Years later, the story returns to Alan, now grown up and working as a gynecologist. In a flashback, Alan's grandmother tells her about money left for her in the bank and their family house. Back in the present, Alan meets a couple struggling to have a child. She assures them she will help by performing an operation. After they leave, Alan calls someone to arrange for a donor. The man on the call seems worried, but Alan reassures him. Later that night, Alan returns home and meets Barak, the man she had called earlier. Barak is paranoid, claiming someone has discovered something. Alan calms him down and sends him away. That night, Alan hears a noise downstairs. When she investigates, she sees the ghost of a woman sitting on a chair in the corridor. The ghost slowly approaches her. Alan tries to open the door but fails. Suddenly, the ghost is in front of her. Alan wakes up, realizing she had fainted. She then sees her grandmother's ghost along with a nurse on her bed. She wakes up again, confused and terrified, as though trapped in layers of dreams. Alan realizes she might have been sleepwalking and is deeply disturbed by the events. The story shifts to the hospital, where a man named Mitha confronts Alan. Years ago, she helped him and his wife have a child through an operation. However, Mitha has since learned he cannot father children. He accuses Alan of using another man's sperm without his consent. Alan reveals that it was his wife's request because she desperately wanted a child. Realizing it was his wife's decision, Mitha calms down and leaves. Alan lied to Mitha to save her life. In reality, Mitha's wife hadn't asked for a child using another man's sperm. Alan had made that decision on her own. After Mitha leaves, Alan goes to meet her boyfriend and tells him she's pregnant. However, her boyfriend doesn't want the child and is not ready for the responsibility. This leads to a fight between them, and Alan storms off, heading home. Meanwhile, Mitha returns home and begins arguing with his wife. Their daughter tries to intervene, but Mitha, angry and frustrated, pushes her away. Since the daughter isn't his biological child, he seems less concerned about her. Something happens to the daughter, but the movie doesn't reveal what yet. On her way home, Alan notices some people in the distance and becomes frightened. She ends up stopping in front of the haunted house and, feeling uneasy, decides to go inside. Inside the house, she enters a room and sees a woman eating. Shortly after, the house's caretaker, Gal, appears. Gal assures Alan there's nothing to worry about because the house is open to everyone. She then leads Alan upstairs, and the perspective briefly shifts to the point of view of Lassa's spirit. Gal explains that there are patients in the house and that it used to be a lodge. During this explanation, a blood-covered woman is shown in the background, walking into a room. Alan doesn't notice her clearly. Gal then goes downstairs to get tea for Alan. Left alone, Alan looks at the pictures hanging on the walls. In a nearby room, she meets a little girl who tells her that in this house, dreams, nightmares, and reality all blend together, making it impossible to tell them apart. Gal returns with tea, gives it to Alan, and leaves. Alan falls asleep and begins to see disturbing visions. She dreams of Mytha's ghost, an unborn baby, a gun, and unsettling scenes. These visions hint at the deeper mystery that the movie's plot will reveal later. When Alan wakes up, she goes downstairs, but the place is empty. As she starts to go back upstairs, the blood-covered woman appears behind her. Alan screams and wakes up again, realizing it was a nightmare. Hearing her screams, Gall comes to comfort her, hugging her tightly. However, Gall briefly shows a sinister smile, hinting at something dark. Downstairs, Alan sees Lossa's shrine. Gall tells her that she must face the sins she has committed. Alan tries to leave the house by opening the door, but it won't budge. Suddenly, Mytha's ghost appears and demands to know why Alan lied to him. After confronting her, he shoots himself in front of her. Gall reappears and tells Alan that she's just a middleman and that everything will be fine. However, Gall also says that Alan will not be allowed to leave the house. Then, the little girl from earlier appears and questions Alan, asking why her grandmother loved her so much yet Alan killed her. It's revealed that Alan poisoned her grandmother's nurse because her grandmother was planning to leave half her property to the nurse. Alan also murdered her grandmother to claim everything for herself. The little girl takes Alan to a room where her grandmother's ghost is present. Alan becomes terrified as she sees herself lying on a bed. The ghost of her grandmother and the nurse are talking to each other. Then the nurse forcefully places an oxygen mask on Alan's face, and her grandmother begins blowing air into her mouth. Suddenly the scene shifts. We are shown what Barak, the man introduced earlier, was worried about. Barak, a married man, had an affair, and his girlfriend became pregnant, threatening his marriage. With Alan's help, he arranged for his girlfriend to have an abortion, but the procedure went wrong and she died. They disposed of her body by throwing it into a well. The blood-drenched woman we've seen earlier turns out to be the ghost of Barak's girlfriend. The scene shifts back to Alan, who wakes up to find the same little girl sitting beside her. The girl suddenly vanishes. Alan hears a voice from downstairs, saying a guest has arrived for her. Barak appears and tells Alan that everyone knows what they've done, but Alan doesn't understand. Suddenly, Alan finds herself in another room. She sees Barak's pregnant girlfriend tied to a chair. The ghost of the girlfriend appears and forces Alan to go through the same torment she experienced. Alan is made to give birth to an unborn child, which the little girl takes into her hands. The scene changes again, and Alan is sitting next to the little girl. The girl tells her that she cannot escape punishment for her sins. The girl reveals that Alan's parents faced consequences for their actions, but Alan must face hers too. She accuses Alan of killing her grandmother and the nurse for money. She also reminds Alan that she used someone else's sperm to impregnate a woman without consent and framed another woman to save herself, leading to the destruction of Mytha's family. We learn that when Mytha pushed his daughter Eiffel in anger, her head hit the edge of a table, and she died from the injury. Devastated, Mytha killed his wife and then took his own life. Meanwhile, Alan had helped Barak abort his girlfriend even though it was too late in the pregnancy, an act driven by greed. The little girl, revealed to be Eiffel, confronts Alan and asks why she destroyed her life and didn't let her celebrate her birthday. Alan hears a birthday song coming from a room and enters to find Eiffel's lifeless body on the floor. Eiffel's ghost, drenched in blood, appears and asks Alan why she ruined her birthday. Terrified, Alan tries to escape but ends up at Lossa's shrine, where Eiffel's ghost keeps repeating the question. Gall appears and tells Alan that she cannot leave until she faces punishment for her wrongdoings. The story concludes with a flashback showing the tragic end of Mytha's family. When Mytha pushed Eiffel, her head struck the corner of the table, and she died due to severe bleeding. Mytha's wife, overwhelmed with grief, took her own life. She had been shot because she didn't know the truth about what had happened. After losing his entire family, Mytha went mad and eventually ended his own life as well. The story shifts back to Alan, and Gall tells her that she must remain there until she is punished for her bad deeds. Meanwhile, Eiffel, the little girl, blows out the candles, symbolizing that all the spirits we've seen so far were present there. Alan desperately knocks on the door, but no one opens it. The scene changes to a blogger, who explains that no one should enter that house or even think of making a movie there because it is highly haunted. Anyone who enters the house cannot leave until they face punishment for their sins. The Shrine of Loss is shown one last time, and it is revealed that this place is like a gateway to another world, a place designed to punish sinners. The blogger explains that the house is essentially a version of hell. Bad people who enter the house receive punishment, just as Alan did. On the other hand, good people are treated well, but those who disturb the spirits, who are half good and half evil, face dire consequences. This fear is why the villagers avoid going near the house. The blogger hints that he might also be trapped there, possibly narrating the story as someone who couldn't escape. The movie highlights Alan's wrongdoings, impregnating someone without consent, blaming others for her actions, performing abortions for money even when it wasn't right, and assisting Barack in a murder. Her sins piled up, and the house ensured she faced her punishment. It seems unlikely she will ever leave the house, as it might also be a place where people who die in accidents, like Alan possibly did before arriving, are brought to face judgment. The movie ends on this eerie note, suggesting that it is based on a true story. The blogger reveals that the house exists in Turkey in real life, and remains a place no one dares to visit. The story concludes with a chilling reminder of the house's haunting legacy.